You're listening to Narcotica, a podcast giving you the straight dope about drugs and the people who use them.
Hey, Narcotica listeners, this is Zachary, Siegel, broadcasting from Chicago, Illinois. We've got the crew in the house today, Chris.
Hey, guys.
Troy.
Hey there.
And so today on the show, we are going to be talking to a very special guest, Garth Mullins, host of the Crackdown podcast. Garth, welcome to the show.
Hey, Zach, how's it going?
Going good. And how are things going with you? Like, I think the Crackdown podcast is blowing up, and the past 3 episodes have been just like incredibly. While it's a delight to listen to this stuff, it's also just totally wrenching. I think that's going to be a main theme of this conversation, is how emotionally raw doing the work you're doing right now, which is essentially like a living oral history of harm reduction in Canada amidst a deadly overdose crisis.
Yeah, I mean, it's rough. I won't lie. Like, we're making this podcast, and the idea is it's drug users covering the drug war as war correspondents. And we gathered ourselves together, kind of little group of drug user activists, and we got a little science advice help and started making radio. And, you know, we were just about to drop the second episode, and one of our editorial board died. And that really fucked us all up. And it was a classic drug war death. And that's Charisse Keewatin, and she was an activist for a long time. She was a real campaigner and a real fighter, a Cree woman here in Vancouver. And yeah, she's gone. And so, like, this last month, we've all been kind of spun a little bit on that, you know, doing her memorial and funeral and stuff. But she said before, you know, we got to keep doing this through grief and anger. And I kind of thought of, you know, Mother Jones organizing with coal miners back, you know, over 100 years ago, said, grieve for the dead, but fight like hell for the living.
Yeah, Garth, I love your tagline. I've written, I would guess you'd call it almost a manifesto about how we need to start covering this as journalists, more like the war it is. I don't know how much you know about Kensington, Philadelphia, but it's like the Syria, you know, of the drug war, pretty much. And you know, I appreciate you. You know, while that language has been used rhetorically, obviously, as a propaganda tool by by prohibitionists, you know, I'm trying to, you know, take it back. Zach and I have discussed this, and we all have discussed this, and it's nice to know that there's somebody else that's thinking along the same line.
Yeah, goddamn right. It feels like a war. I mean, shit, the amount of people I've lost in my life, I was trying to count up. I got to about 50, and I actually had to stop because you have to remember each of them. And it's like way too much for your brain to handle. It is a war. It feels like a war. There's military occupation of our communities. They're taking prisoners of war. Yeah, people die because of policy reasons, because of how they change the battlefronts. It is absolutely a war.
And we have surges and then pullbacks, and I mean, just everything parallels the way a war is fought, at least in the community I cover.
Yeah, and I do know Philly as well a little bit, and I know that the ex-governor there of PA was saying, you know, come and arrest me. He's backing a safe injection site there. And he's just like, bring it on to Trump's deputy AG there. And that's exactly the right way to do it, because that is the only way we've ever gotten anything here, is to do it illegally first, because they will never give it to you. So we have to pry it out of their hands by taking direct action.
Yeah, so there's like so much to jump off from right here. And like, so episode 1, though, it's called War Correspondents, right? And so Chris, you wrote a column for Filter saying, like, journalists need to cover the overdose crisis like a war. And so, like, when I read that at first, I was like, so does that mean, like, you know, highlighting the brutality, you know, like images of people on the street, like needles in the neck? And so, like, Time Magazine and the New Yorker, like last year, they did these glossy photo essays about overdoses, and they showed the bodies. They showed people overdosing. They showed injecting in the neck, the whole 9 yards. And I like reacted really critically to it. So like in Slate, I wrote that this is like exploitive shit and that it's counterproductive. I called it disaster porn. And so like that work to me, it was just like a fancier version of A&E intervention, just like total like injection needle porn. And I think after like listening to the war correspondent segment and thinking more about your column, Chris, like I think I want to refine my point a little bit and just feel like when the correspondence, when it's like Chris Moraff, who is like embedded in Philly, or when it's you, Garth, who you're an active organizer in the drug user and methadone patient community, like when it's you guys doing the documenting, it doesn't feel exploitive. Like it feels subjectively different. And I think like that's something I want to talk about. Like a journalist for the New York Times like escorted around Kensington to the quote like bad part of town on a ride along with a cop or DEA agent. Like that's gonna be a slanted, fucked up view of the neighborhood. Like you're rolling around with the occupier. So like Garth, like what's your take on this? Like do you think about like what is exploitation and what is documentary?
Yeah, I saw those photo essays too, and I kind of reacted like you did. And I've just seen, you know, in TV news for a generation, there's been this kind of needle porn type stuff, you know, just images of people shooting up, and there's a real class problem with it because everybody uses drugs all over, like up and down the sort of class hierarchy in society, but it's only people who don't have a place that get shown on TV. Right, so it's problematic from that. It's problematic from a sort of a consent kind of perspective and a stigmatizing perspective. But also, you know, is that like war coverage? Well, there's good and bad war correspondent coverage too. Like you look at how Fox News covers the war in Iraq or something like that. You look at how people use images of soldiers and images of casualties and stuff, even in war. You know, if a TV network in the U.S. went and showed people like in states of distress like that, they in a war, American soldiers, they probably would get a lot of backlash.
And they did, you know, and in the Second World War, that was, you know, there was a backlash against showing American soldiers. Journalists fought for the right to do so. And Vietnam, you know, which I like to, you know, harken back to because that was the last war where journalists were really allowed to go out the way we do and just, you know, cover without escorts, so to speak, you know. And I think that, you know, if you could show children dead of a gas attack in Syria, you know, that's a direct result of a policy. You know, I feel like we have to, you know, there's a fine line, I think, between exploitation and public information. And, you know, I walk it every day. I've made mistakes. Who doesn't? But where does your line? I guess, you know, carrying what Zach was saying, you know, where do you find the line to be drawn?
Yeah, I mean, we thought about this a lot, right? Like in episode 2, we're sitting down with Laura Shaver, who's a good friend of mine, and Big Pharma changed a lot of the methadone formulation in Canada and a lot of parts of the U.S., and it started making people dope sick again. Like methadone is supposed to do one thing. It's supposed to stop you from feeling the withdrawal symptoms from not using opioids like heroin. It's like a nicotine patch, right? And then when they change it and people are starting to feel dope sick halfway through the day, well, we all start using again. Like this is my story. I'm a heroin user from back in the day, and I'm on methadone now. But this is like if your treatment fails you, the bottom of your life falls out. And so Laura is in that position, and we're starting the interview, and she's got to do a hit first, and she's like, just leave the mic, you know, like this is actually what's happening. And so, you know, we thought about that a lot, and we made sure to tell the story the way Laura would want to tell it and to show you a fully formed human being, not like on the TV news when you see someone using drugs and it's just like, here's a person as a random sensationalized image to show you how fucked up everything is. And in episode 3, we talk about how safe injection sites can come to be in places that don't want them, you know, like lots and lots of places. We show people the history of how they've been fought for and won. And so we take you to one where there's 2 drug users that are helping each other. And one of the drug users is a staff person, and he's helping the other person inject. And it's not like this sensational voyeuristic thing. It's this super tender moment between these two guys, one who's really like putting his hands on the other person and helping him out a lot, right? It's this sort of mutual aid moment. So I think it's the narrative that you put around it and how you think about the people that are there.
I want to take a step back and kind of talk about why we wanted to talk to you on the show. When we started Narcotica about a year ago, I was talking to Zach, and he mentioned that Chris and he had kicked this idea around, and we decided to go with it. There wasn't really a lot of podcasts that I'm aware of that were doing what we're kind of doing, which is highlighting drug use as kind of a normal human behavior, and treating people who use drugs as human, and also pushing back against so many false media narratives that really destroy people's lives. So when Crackdown came out, I have to be honest, my first inclination was, we have a little bit of competition. And then, after I could get over that like lizard brain monkey thing, my reaction is like, no, this is another voice doing something important, and this is something to really highlight. And so then I actually listened to it, and I was blown away by the production and how thorough you are. You have a whole team of legal and scientific advisors that are really making this happen, and I think it's really powerful. What was your motivation for starting this podcast?
I guess I've made documentary radio as a freelancer before, and I've been a freelance journalist, and I take an opioid every morning before having a cup of coffee, like methadone, and so I thought this might be a good way to punch through a little bit. But also I realized as a freelancer that I was having trouble landing stories that were a little more complex or a little more nuanced, and that there just wasn't a space to tell the kind of thing I wanted to tell. So I even pitched the documentary idea to our national public broadcaster, NPR's sort of equivalent north of the border, and I didn't manage to land it there, even though I had gotten other documentaries on there. And I just thought, screw it, I'll have to do it myself. And then I learned a few lessons in it just from the struggle as well. Like people don't really, they're highly suspicious of what drug users are saying. So when we sit down in a room with some kind of official or government person, they're disbelieving of us to begin with. So bringing along a research scientist started to turn the tables on that a little bit. I mean, they didn't do what we wanted. Dr. Ryan McNeil is a research scientist. He's part of the School of Medicine at the University of British Columbia. And he sometimes will direct his research into what we're asking for from the community. Could you look into this? Could you study that? And then he comes and reports back. And so we just thought taking that combination of the lived experience and the science together, taking it from our meeting rooms and from the streets and bringing it onto the airwaves, we thought that could work. So, I didn't know how we were going to do it, but it seems like it's happening okay so far. And also, by the way, we don't have really a big team, and we don't have a lawyer. But when we're kind of calling out pharmaceutical companies, I realize we're probably gonna have to sort that out a little bit.
Let's enter parody mode and not slander Big Pharma. Okay, back to the show. So like episode 2, I think is really sort of the embodiment of this synthesis between the user experience and the science. And so episode 2, like I love the topic. And you do like a wonderful investigation into it of drug tolerance, physiological tolerance, and how environment and psychology interacts with our experience of drugs and mediates that experience. And I don't think people really get like how powerful environmental cues and psychological factors are in how we respond to drugs. But like at the same time, I feel like doctors use that to marginalize and disempower the experience of drug users. And to talk about the episode a little bit, it's about how there was this decision, which sounded like a super like neoliberal decision, to just change the formula of methadone to a different company and the new formula was called Methadose. And so can you talk about like what the problem was there and sort of what the larger story of this change sort of captures when treating addiction is on the table?
So people all over the U.S. are taking methadose in different places. And lots of places you just can't even get access to methadone or Suboxone or anything like that at all. So methadose is like a branded big pharma version of methadone. And methadone has been around for decades. It's made generic. There's no copyright or patent on it anymore. And so, yeah, in about 5 years ago, up where I live, the government just decided they were going to switch from the generic to the branded stuff called methadose.
Just unilaterally. There wasn't any open hearing, any consulting of people who take the drug, just unilaterally changed it.
That's right. And so lots of us who were sort of activists got a little bit of a heads up this was coming. Like we figured out something was in the wind, and we tried to get in there and say, hey, let's do some awareness raising. Let's just tell people that this is happening if we can't change it. I mean, we obviously demanded to have a say, first off. But they said no. I mean, we put up posters at least telling people what was happening so they wouldn't be completely caught off guard. But we thought, okay, this will be the big problem, is that the change will catch people by surprise. We never suspected that the stuff would be less effective. And so in the days after the switch, so many people, like practically everybody I know, started getting sick, started getting dope sick.
It's very interesting because I stopped using heroin with the aid of methadose, which was the formulation that's been used here in Philadelphia, and I always thought that was kind of a myth, that it was just like ibuprofen versus generic ibuprofen. But you were able to personally validate that it is a weaker formulation. I mean, it should be like a 1 to 100 milliliter formulation of the active drug to whatever the filler is. What is different about it exactly?
So I don't have a lab, and I haven't found anyone with a lab yet where we can get through the barriers of obtaining legally samples of both and comparing the molecule and comparing the ingredients and all that stuff. But what we did find out is anecdotally, a bunch of people were getting sick. We got together and had meetings. We have this group called the BC Association of People on Methadone. And we got together and people were just saying, oh, this is terrible. I'm back to using heroin again. And as the weeks went on, the group just stopped meeting because everyone was out grinding, trying to get up money to get themselves well, right? So it almost disappeared. And then we started losing people because this was 5 years ago and the overdose crisis was starting to creep up. And we started losing people off the group, and cobbling the group back together was just, it was painful and sad. And I mean, the last person from the group that we lost was Charisse Kiwatin, who I was talking about earlier, who's also on my editorial board, who died most recently. And I mean, she was basically dope sick every day for the last 5 years till the end of her life because this formulation didn't work for her. And we asked Ryan McNeil if he would start studying this and look at it. And he and other doctors, Greer, Socius, and others, started surveying and asking people who use drugs and sort of trying to figure out, are people getting dope sick? How widespread is this problem? And it was huge. So they found, probably half of the people, maybe more, on this new stuff were getting dope sick. Big proportion of them were using heroin again. People were on HIV meds were less likely to take them properly and every day. And there were other outcomes of this. But so these were peer-reviewed, published papers that we immediately sent to the government, and we were trying to get access to the old stuff again. But we weren't able to, and we're still in a fight with the government about that right now. But we just lost so many people. I don't know how many people of the thousands that have died where I live. I don't know how many of those thousands would still be alive today had they had an effective treatment. But it's got to be a lot. And we find if you go ask people who are at the overdose prevention site, the place where you can basically use and someone will keep an eye on you and give you naloxone or Narcan if you fall out, if you overdose. I don't know if you ask people who go to those places, hey, did you take methadone this morning? Like almost a third of them say yes. So if you're in a safe injection site using, and you're supposed to be on methadone, it's supposed to be working. Something's obviously not working.
Right. I mean, you had mentioned earlier it's meant to take away the physical symptoms, and I would go one step further and say it's actually meant to take away the cravings, the desire. At least in my case, it did. I was, like I said, methadose was what was used here, and there were people that used to reminisce about when they would get methadone, and it was, I just didn't know if it was just like, there's so much mythology on the streets, and it even translates into resistance to methadone among users themselves, which is tragic in my opinion. So methadone is readily available in Canada. I mean, in the sense that you can satellite dose. I mean, one of the biggest problems we have here in the States is that there's been no talk about methadone reform, and it's individual clinics are allowed to make their own policies regarding take homes. There's no universal standards. There are federal guidelines, but they're not required. And Suboxone is simply not cutting it for a large proportion of the people that have higher tolerances due to the fentanyl that's now in predominantly in all of the heroin in Philly. Is there a politics around those two drugs where you are? Is there a push? Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So, I mean, we want to reform the methadone system here, too. I agree with you. Suboxone isn't cutting it for a lot of people. I think methadose probably does work for some people, and it worked for you. That's excellent. So I wouldn't want to take it away from anybody. I just think there should be choice. But, we are trying to increase the amount of choice, but health authorities love to prescribe methadone and Suboxone because it's kind of like they have a little baked-in cop, like especially Suboxone, right? It's got a naloxone baked into it, so you can't really use drugs and be on Suboxone without making some little moves there to do it. And and methadone is the same. It doesn't have a cop baked in, but it's got a little scold baked in. It's got a little thing that kind of keeps you from feeling the opiate directly. And other forms of treatment don't necessarily have that. Like, people for a long time in other parts of the world have used just prescription heroin, and we have a trial of that here. And I think that methadone and Suboxone might not be up for it for a lot of people in the overdose crisis. So we might just be better off to prescribe people pharmaceutical grade, clean heroin.
I feel like what this really gets to is like that amazing quote, like Puritanism is the haunting fear that someone somewhere may be happy. like we just like can't let people experience pleasure. And I feel like one of the ideological resistances to doling out pharmaceutical grade heroin or injectable hydromorphone is like, why are we just going to let people get high? And I think it's going to take so much work in the US to fight against that. Like of course, like we need to reschedule diacetyl morphine to prescribe it, and doctors currently can't prescribe or maintain anyone on things like hydromorphone, and like that's going to be a huge battle. But as the illicit supply gets more and more and more dangerous, and like Chris is saying, things like Suboxone or buprenorphine aren't powerful enough to keep people alive and safe, like it's an inevitability. Like, how do we not institute or at least run clinical trials and test and pilot these new ways that people can get their dose safely in a regulated, supervised way?
Yeah, I mean, this is the core problem in the drug war, right? It's not really about evidence, because all of the evidence is on our side. It's about ideology. And I mean, you have that Plymouth Rock Puritanism just deep in the DNA of the country. And we have the same kind of, in English Canada at least, we have this kind of Protestant work ethic. We really, in BC and a lot of Canada, they really regulate where you can buy beer and under what circumstances, and special government stores for it and stuff like this. So it really does go back a long way. And I think that's right at the heart of it, is would they rather see people have a little bit of bodily autonomy or dead? And right now the answer is, well, dead.
I want to kind of talk about differences between Canadian and U.S. policy, because from an American perspective, from what I see from people in the States, is that Canada is this super progressive, paradise, especially when it comes to drugs. I mean, of course, you legalized cannabis recently on a federal level. You at least have supervised consumption rooms, and more seem to be opening on a frequent basis. And that kind of thing. But that's not the full picture, is it? Right? I mean, there is a lot of drug policy in Canada that is regressive and is harmful towards people. Can we talk about that contrast?
Yeah, I mean, Canada is great at marketing itself to the rest of the world as a bastion of progressiveness and tolerance. But really, we contain all of the same ingredients as the U.S. We're just like... we're sort of like a little apologetic about it, so we sort of don't proudly say that we're shits. We try to apologize a little bit and sweep it under the carpet. So you just get a different style of rhetoric, but a lot of the policies are in some ways parallel. And I mean, you have a deep doubling down on this stuff right now. But we also have politicians in the mode of Trump. In fact, I'll say that we invented the Trump before you guys. We had a mayor of our biggest city who was named Rob Ford, and he was exactly what Trump is. And so Trump came after, as a political phenomenon, after Rob Ford. Now Rob Ford's brother runs the biggest province in Canada, the biggest jurisdiction, and he's shutting safe injection sites there. And so there's a real, this backlash. Conservatism is alive and well in Canada. Half of the provinces are run by people, and probably more soon, who are of the main opposition party has kind of connections into the alt-right that they don't even try to apologize for. So we have all of those same ingredients. We just we're not as good as marketing them as you. So we invented the smartphone up here. We had the BlackBerry, I think by RIM, was the first smartphone. But of course, people don't really think fondly of the BlackBerry because you guys did it better and marketed it to the world. So it's just we had the BlackBerry Trump, and then you guys iPhoned that shit and brought it everywhere,
And on this note, so a lot of the capital SP serious people in drug policy in America, they look at the OD rates, the overdose rates in America and the overdose rates in Canada, in Vancouver especially, and say, oh, look how similar the rates are. And Canada even has nationalized health care and all this harm reduction. And they take that and proceed to argue that the harm reduction interventions just don't work, and that the overdose prevention effects of all this harm reduction is way overblown. And this is a loaded question, but why is that argument bullshit?
Because we've never implemented harm reduction. Not in Canada. We've done pilot projects. We've done a few tinkering at the edge. And so we've done some tests and some studies, but we've never rolled it out as a universal standard. We sort of let any city or town decide what they're going to do. It's up to them. So if you have a local mayor that's a real piece of shit, won't let anybody do anything, they don't do it. Some places it's still very difficult to get syringes and all that sort of stuff. So the idea that we have just harm reduction and it's failed is completely unscientific. And those serious people are actually just rhetoricians, or else they just haven't done their homework. Because, it's an unfinished project. It really has yet to be properly rolled out. But also, harm reduction doesn't eliminate the harm, doesn't end the drug war. It's a reform, right? So when you use naloxone, when I break open one of those glass ampules that contains the naloxone and I draw it up, that is an intervention in the last couple of heartbeats of somebody's life. That is literally the last possible thing you could do to help. We got to go way upstream. We got to way upstream in policy, in governance, and in the person's life, so that things don't get to that point. It's just it is the Band-Aid, is the triage, right? Like someone's in a car wreck and you're trying to drag them away from the burning twisted metal. And then someone comes up and says, well, this person hasn't been fully cured. What's wrong? This is obviously ineffective. You should just let them burn. It's like, well, no, we need a hospital. We need surgeons. We need all that stuff. You're telling me as I'm dragging someone away from a car wreck, oh, this isn't good enough. Oh, well, fuck you. What are you doing?
I would go on to say, like, when the Fords were blowing up, it's like, well, why are all these cars blowing up? So, it's because they're made poorly, right? So our policy is made poorly. And in terms of the supervised injection fight, which Philadelphia has kind of become a nexus for, we have the first federal case now that will, I believe, ultimately go to the Supreme Court for a decision on this. I was at a town hall meeting last night that was filled with probably 150 to 200 very angry white working to lower working class folks from the neighborhood of Kensington that repeatedly just shouted about how they don't want an injection facility in their neighborhood, ignoring the fact that they already have one. It's just outside in their backyard. And on their front stoops. But what was noticeably absent was a vocal contingent of drug users. And we have a nation's effort right now to organize a drug users union here in Philly. We haven't had a lot of success with that. And I know that in Vancouver there has been some. I wonder if you could sort of without necessarily getting into like the geographic and maybe the socioeconomic differences in the population, just in general, what advice would you have for drug users that want to be active but are still, they have to hustle, almost full time at the same time? How do they find the time? How does an active drug user find the time to make it to a meeting and then, with the stigma attached, speak up in favor of themselves?
Okay, well, first of all, don't ask people to do that by themselves. We go collectively to shit like that. That's a high barrier to have basically a mob turn on you in one of those things. Try and get on the program to try and make a presentation to people. But also, it's like the question of how to organize. You're right. People got to hustle all day. You sit down with some of those people who are organizing, who are involved in government, who are the scientists, who are the serious people you talked about. Those people get paid. We need to get paid too. So the first thing is, if you're trying to organize a drug user union, pay people to show up to the meeting. That will carve out the time from the hustle and let people come. So it doesn't have to be much. I mean, we started with $3, which is basically bus fare, and I think we do $5 right now. And I know that's like shocking to people to say, oh, they're going to spend it on drugs. Well, fuck, of course, right? But that's okay, because there's an hour of someone's time where they have to do something that's not illegal, it's not harmful, it's not risky. So it's harm reduction. It helps them. And yeah, people will come and they'll show up for the money first. But this is how we built the movement, is that people showed up for the money first, but then they kept coming for the politics and the organizing. And they realized that it's like a little bit of self-determination, a little bit of agency in your life. My God, it's fantastic. It should be prescribed as drug treatment. And then you just keep doing that. You just got to do that every fucking week for years and years, and you just keep doing it. That's how you build.
So what you're saying is you need George Soros to fund drug users to come to meetings.
Yeah, but you know what? You don't need a billionaire. And all this like George Soros stuff is just like it's like a terrible dog whistle. It's like a terrible, nasty piece of thing. So yeah, if he's listening, we'd gladly accept some of the Soros bucks. But it doesn't need very much money to start. Like you really don't. It could be very low barrier.
At the end of episode 3, you encourage people to do whatever it takes to make harm reduction happen. And so let's be clear here. You're asking people to break the law. And maybe that means stealing medical supplies. Maybe that means opening an unofficial supervised consumption room. And I am so grateful that you are asking people to take risks like that, although I'm not sure about the legality of suggesting such things.
Oh, it's illegal. It's illegal. What we're suggesting is illegal. Like when the law is saying you cannot open a safe injection site, and I'm telling you, just go on and do it. Yes, this is civil disobedience. We're asking people to break the law. No question about it.
I'm grateful for that you asking that, because that's how these things become legal, as we've already talked about. I'm not really aware if there's any examples of harm reduction programs becoming legally sanctioned without activists first risking arrest. Syringe access programs, naloxone distribution, all these examples. And personally, I volunteered as part of an underground needle exchange for a year in Phoenix. We did it out of our cars. Every Sunday at Los Altos supermarket at 16th Street in Roosevelt, we'd park in the back and hand out syringes and Narcan and condoms and whatever. And it was totally illegal. Under Arizona's paraphernalia law, we could have all been arrested because we had these devices used for drug use. And especially, we also collected used rigs, and they had traces of drugs on them. And the security guard, he turned a blind eye to these dozens of people lining up to my shitty Ford Escape filled with boxes and boxes of syringes. But literally across the fucking street was the health department. And they should have been doing what we were doing in an air-conditioned room, and not in the goddamn parking lot in the middle of summer.
Absolutely.
There was a law that was considered about a year ago that would have legalized what we were doing, but it failed. It didn't get enough political support from the Democrats. However, the program Shot in the Dark is still going, and they still sort of have an understanding with the cops, but it's still technically illegal. So I thank you for highlighting that, because that's literally what it takes to make harm reduction laws become reality.
Thank you for doing that. Like, when I lived in the Bay Area, there was a guerrilla needle exchange that would set up sometimes out front of City Hall to make a point. There was a big camp there to resist the city's policies at the time too, and at Civic Center Park, that's where it was. And that's where I got Clean Works from, and I would never have been able to obtain them but for those people. And they would show up with a couple of those big white 5-liter gallon, whatever it is, right, buckets, and they would have one full of new works and one to take away the used ones, and we would line up and it would go fast. There'd be no check your ID, have a discussion. It would just, and the guy, I still remember this. I was just a kid, and the guy patted me on the back and he's like, "Take care of yourself, brother. Go do what you got to do." And I was just like, fuck, man, what a moment of humanity in all of this. And that sticks with me, and I can't imagine how we can do it any other way. And my fucking hat's off to people who are doing this, because I know there are a lot of places all over the States, and we didn't mention that because we didn't want to blow up anybody's spot on the show. But we recognize that there's a lot of people who are taking risks, and sometimes you take a risk and you try and keep it secret, and sometimes you take a risk and you get somebody who's they don't have warrants, they've got some legal support, and you say, let's get arrested and let's challenge this thing in court. Let's bring it on and let's see what happens. And sometimes that's how the law changes too.
I was fortunate enough to be in a city, Philadelphia, where we had one of the earliest legal needle exchanges, thanks to then Mayor Ed Rendell. I take for granted that there's places that don't have it. I never really, very rarely had to buy a syringe on the street, and that was 20 years ago. So. Hats off to Philly in some ways for taking that step in that direction.
Yeah, that guy Rendell, the first time I really ever heard of him was when he was saying on the TV or the radio or something, come and get me to the U.S. attorney, and he was like, here's my office building address, like, come and arrest me if you don't like it. And I just thought, oh, we need more of that. That was good.
So about 2 miles from me right now is like the west side of Chicago proper, and that's where Chicago Recovery Alliance operates. The home of Dan Big, and he, like, every time I see his silver vans roaming the street, I'm just like, I don't know, I just like well up with tears now, because his absence is so profoundly devastating. But the Chicago Recovery Alliance is still going on. It's still doing its thing. And what they're doing now, and I think it's incredibly innovative, they got spectrometer devices to go mobile, and they are checking drugs on the west side and trying to like develop an early warning system for when a super potent batch is going out, and they're getting like corner dealers to participate. They're getting drug users to participate. And this is all just like so far out of anything the health department in Chicago would ever sanction or put money to, or like even see as viable. And they're just roaming around and doing it fucking anyway.
I mean, this for folks maybe listening from north of the border who don't know, Dan Big didn't wait for official permission to be granted to distribute naloxone to drug users. This is the substance that can reverse an overdose. I first learned about it in the 90s during the first overdose crisis in Vancouver. This is my second overdose crisis. And we knew that the paramedics had it, but we couldn't get it. And we were the ones who were in the right place to have it. And we fought for years. Occasionally we'd obtain it without permission through people like Dan. And when the health authorities found out, they would come and snatch it back off us. Cops used to arrest people for having it. And this guy didn't give a fuck. He was just like, people need this. And, you know, he would have a big bag full of it or whatever. And now I have, I've right over here, like a bag full of 20 Narcan kits. And I never would have had that except for people like him. I'm wearing a Chicago Recovery t-shirt right now. I mean, props to this guy, right?
Yeah, he was known for literally carrying duffel bags of naloxone everywhere he went. Like every conference, everywhere he went, he'd have duffel bags.
Yeah, he used conferences as a means of distribution. You know, we even had a conference up here I guess I was there in September, October of 2018. And I saw a big plastic garbage bag full of naloxone kits for someone going back into the prairies in a province that doesn't have very good naloxone distribution. So we're still doing that. You know, we're still fighting to make sure this is everywhere. I asked Leo Beletsky how much of the U.S. drug using population could probably access naloxone. And he said, maybe 15%. So I think it's still a big struggle, you know?
Oh, it's a huge struggle. I just heard that cases are like getting confiscated still. Like there are some naloxone laws and a lot of states have them, but one of the big problems is like the cops they don't get a memo when the law changes. Like they don't get any training on like, okay, like there's Good Samaritan laws, like don't prosecute people who call 911, or hey, the paraphernalia law changed, like don't arrest people for possessing syringes, or now there's a standing order for naloxone and people don't need a prescription for it, don't hassle them. Like that takes a lot of time and a lot of effort, and it doesn't just change overnight. And so all these problems are still carrying on even with changes in naloxone distribution and the laws and everything. And then we get economists like start coming out arguing moral hazard.
Oh, yeah.
And they're using Google fucking searches as the proxy for people getting the shit. And it's just mind numbing. It is just like go crawl back into the Brookings Institution basement and like write about some other shit. Like this is not your bag.
So this moral hazard argument is used for clean needles and everything. It's like if we give them this ability to be safer, like naloxone, they'll just use more. It'll just encourage them. And I think it first came about for seatbelts, right? Like if you put seatbelts in cars, people will just drive more recklessly. But like, are those same people arguing we shouldn't wear seatbelts? Are those same people driving right now, driving their kids around to soccer practice or whatever the hell you guys do down there, and they're not giving them child seats, whatever, the little car seats and stuff like that? Are they just like, okay, little Johnny, sorry if you rocket through the windshield, but I have a political point to make here, so let's go. I don't believe it, you know?
Just like apply that same logic to insulin. Like, oh, having insulin around is a moral hazard for people with diabetes to like eat more donuts. It's just like an absurd line of argument, but because an economist starts cranking out papers and the Brookings Institution published it, now we have both sides. Now journalists have two sides to cover. Does this, quote, enable addicts? Like those are the headlines now. And it's so mind-numbing to watch.
Yeah, and it's just, I mean, this is where we have to speak to journalists. Get your shit together. both sidesism is dead, right? Like, both sidesism in journalism is the equivalent of Trump saying there's nice people on both sides. No, some things are fucking pretty clear. You know, climate change, the effectiveness of naloxone, that Nazis suck. Like, we can definitively say, we don't have to relitigate those things in every article. You know, like, you can close the door on some stuff.
I love this anecdote of you know, you mentioned seatbelts and sort of that. Seatbelts are a great example of how you can change behavior without, you know, cracking down. And so there's a particular source that I regularly interview and talk to, and he kind of keeps an eye on the street for me. And he got in the car at one time and hooked himself in to his seatbelt and then proceeded to mix up a shot and hit his neck. And I remember pointing out, you know, I love that, you know, like, it's so second nature. You're putting your seatbelt on, you know, and like, we can teach people to be safer. And I think that's the argument that we don't have, is that in America, at least, it's like, we don't have the conversation around safe drug use. You know, alcohol is legal, so we can have a conversation around responsible drinking. But it's either you're using drugs and your life is a mess, or you're completely abstinent. And I think that's a message that we all need to start changing. And part of that has come from the disease model, which basically says, you know, there is no discipline in you know, there's no willpower, there's no, and I think that's a crock of shit. I know people that use responsibly, and I know people who use irresponsibly.
This is this is the problem, right? This is, I mean, it sort of aligns with conservatives and liberals. Is that conservatives use the criminal model, like, we're moral failures and we're criminals and should go to jail, and the more liberal sort of political center type people, they sort of say, well, we should be pitied and maybe sympathized with because we're sick and we should be cured. And then you got the proper left, I don't know, whatever you call it, the sociology model, which is like, look around at the construction of the drug war and the society that's creating these harms and trace back the harms. You know, find out where that is. Maybe the individual and the molecule aren't the right units to be looking at.
Exactly. Well, I think this is a good place to wrap up, Garth. What's next for you and for Crackdown? You're going to be doing monthly episodes for a while, right?
We are, and the next episode, we are going to take you to a strange, unknown place for our listeners. We are going to the suburbs, and after that, we're going to Portugal. So those are the next couple of months for us are going to be taking people. You know, we've spent a bit of time on Vancouver's Downtown Eastside. And we're going to take people further afield.
It sounds great. Anything else you want to plug?
No, just the more people who subscribe to us, the better we do, the more chances we'll be able to keep making this and keep doing it. You know, it's not really a full-time job for anybody, but it would be great if it was, and we'd be able to make it a little more frequently or do something more than once a month.
You heard it here, folks. Support harm reduction podcasting. It is a thing.
I'd like to plug a collaboration at some point between us. I think if we leveraged our resources, perhaps we could do something, you know, really cool and really interesting, you know, that spans the borders.
You know, I was thinking about that before, and we're all journalists of one way or another, and maybe some kind of let's pull the drug war apart from the practice of journalism, and we go deeper into this both sidesism and the kind of representations of drug users that you see, and sort of tear it apart a little bit.
Yo, that is very necessary. I'd like to have some transnational network of journalists doing this kind of journalism. I think could be very powerful.
Garth, where can people find more about you?
Well, our website is crackdownpod.com. If you want to get me, I'm on Twitter. That's at Garth Mullins, GarthMullins. And the podcast is on iTunes and Stitcher and SoundCloud and, you know, all the places where you get your podcasts from.
Okay. Garth Mullins, thanks for coming on the show.
Hey, thank you very much, Zach, Chris, Troy. Troy, thank you so much for basically risking your freedom to give out clean needles to people like me. That's respect, man. Seriously.
The only response I have to that is the reason I did it was because no one else was. I mean, other people in the group were, of course, but I mean, like I said, the fucking state should have been taking care of these people.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I couldn't agree more. And sometimes we just have to break the way first. But like, that's when I hope we can. This is why I don't want us to, all activists, to turn into people who run safe injection sites or illegal safe injection sites, because we often do. I'd like us to get on to the next thing. You know, I want us to win something, get it institutionalized, have it as a health program, and get on to the next thing. The problem is we're always fighting rearguard battles, and these wins, even in Canada, even in the progressive, apologetic Canada, they're still very precarious.
Well, it was a pleasure having you on, Garth. We learned a lot. Thanks, and looking forward to keeping listening to the podcast.
Yeah, and keep up the good work and good writing, everybody. Appreciate it.
You too, man. It's been a pleasure.
All right, see ya.